On a muddy tidal beach in southern Bangladesh sit some of the largest machines humans have ever built. Container ships and oil tankers taller than a 15-story building, laid flat, each one about to be taken apart entirely by hand. Nearly three-quarters of every ship retired anywhere on Earth ends up on a beach just like this one, in India, Bangladesh, or Pakistan. So how do you actually take apart something the size of a skyscraper using little more than a torch, a rope, and a falling tide? And why does almost the entire world still choose to do it this way? The process is called beaching, and it starts long before any ship reaches the sand. Once a vessel becomes too old or too expensive to keep running, the owner rarely deals with the scrapping directly, selling the ship instead to a middleman known in the industry as a cash buyer. That cash buyer often reflags the vessel to a completely different country, sometimes a small island nation. Most people could not find on a map and renames it entirely, erasing the ship's original identity days before its very last voyage. An international rule meant to govern all of this, called the Hong Kong Convention, was actually written back in 2009, but it took 16 years to gather enough ratifying countries to legally take effect, finally entering into force only in June of 2025. For most of the ships scrapped across those 16 years, no binding international safety standard applied to this industry at all. The freshly renamed ship then sails, often still under its own engine power, straight toward one of three coastlines, along in India, Chattogram in Bangladesh, or Gadani in Pakistan, which together handle around 70% of all shipbreaking on the planet. The ship arrives timed precisely to the tide. At high water, the crew runs it directly onto the sloped beach at full speed, deliberately grounding tens of thousands of tons of steel into the mud, and then everyone waits. As the tide pulls back out, more and more of the hull is exposed, and that is when workers move in, cutting the exposed steel into sections with handheld gas torches while the ship still sits half in the water. There are no dry docks here, no cranes lifting the vessel clear of the tide, just an incoming and outgoing ocean doing part of the job for free. Before any cutting begins, the ship is technically supposed to be surveyed for hazardous material, since older vessels are frequently lined with asbestos insulation, heavy metals, and oil-soaked sludge built up over decades of use. In practice, testing in Alang once found asbestos fibers not just inside the ships themselves but in the soil of workers' own living quarters nearby, carried home on clothing and skin after a full shift spent handling it with bare hands. Piece by piece, the ship gets reduced to slabs of steel, small enough for a crew to drag up the beach by rope and winch, destined for local rolling mills that melt it down into construction rebar. In Bangladesh alone, this single industry supplies roughly half of the country's entire steel output. Everything else inside the ship gets a second life too. Furniture, generators, lifeboats, and even the portholes end up resold in local second-hand markets within days of being pulled off the hull. Here is the part nobody tells you when this industry gets described as newly regulated and cleaned up. Since the Hong Kong Convention entered force, more than 100 shipbreaking plots in Alang alone have obtained something called a Statement of Compliance, a private certification claiming the yard meets the convention's safety standard, not government inspected, not independently audited by any outside regulator. Just a certificate purchased business to business, while the underlying method, running a ship straight onto an open beach, remains completely unchanged. 2 weeks before this script was written, a massive oil spill broke out at one of those same certified yards in Alang after a tanker being dismantled there was struck by an unusually high tide, sending oil washing along 10 kilometers of coastline into a nearby fishing village. The official language calls the beaching method newly regulated and increasingly compliant. The fuller reality is that a certificate cannot change the physics of an open tidal beach, and the workers still cutting steel with handheld torches, standing in ankle-deep water, know that better than anyone holding the paperwork. The renaming trick from the very start of this process is not just bureaucratic cover either. Earlier this year, an American shipping company's container ship was quietly reflagged to a small Caribbean nation and renamed before being dispatched across the entire Pacific Ocean toward Alang, despite that same company's own public promises to avoid beach-based scrapping entirely. Environmental groups tracking the vessel in real time watched its identity change and its destination shift within the same voyage, a ship essentially wearing a disguise for the final weeks of its life, specifically to avoid the accountability its own original name would have carried. The human cost behind all of this remains the least visible part of the entire system. Since 2009, at least 470 workers have been killed across South Asia's shipbreaking beaches, a fatal accident rate close to 6 times higher than mining, an industry already considered one of the most dangerous on Earth. When a worker dies on the job in Bangladesh, the standard compensation comes to roughly $5,700, covering less than 2 years of an average household's expenses and no pension beyond that. So the honest picture of where ships actually go to die is less a graveyard and more a transformation happening in full view, just far enough from the buyer's home country that almost nobody watching a cruise or a cargo ship ever has to see the ending. The steel comes back as rebar holding up new buildings, the furniture comes back on second-hand shelves, and the workers who make that transformation possible remain almost entirely invisible to the industry that depends on them. If a ship can legally change its name and its nationality just to reach a beach quietly, it makes you wonder what actually happens to something seized specifically because it was never supposed to exist in the first place, like a warehouse full of counterfeit goods pulled off the market. If this kind of hidden system is the sort of thing you want to keep seeing unpacked stage by stage, subscribing keeps the next one coming.